Question 5, if Saif can prepare himself, please. Another terrible statistic, I was talking about all the reports that we've been reading through, government reports and other reports, shows a staggering dropout rate between grade 9 and matric. In certain quintiles, that's over 50%. Quintiles are basically earnings brackets. If you don't know what we're talking about, it's been mentioned before. Definitely this has the biggest impact on black learners. It's almost a discussion in itself, and it's spent the whole evening on this, but let's try and focus it in. Saif, what's your question, please?
Given that there are numerous reasons for the high percentage of students that drop out of schools from the grades 9 to 12, such as having to leave school to find work to support their family financially, does your party intend to provide incentives for such impoverished learners to remain in school?
Mr. Makabuti, do you want to start with that, please?
Well, we've already begun to ensure that we have the school nutrition scheme and that we want to extend to all levels from poor schools, not only in primary schools, but also in high schools. But the issue of dropout rates, you have mentioned it, the challenges that cause it. And we really need to deal with the whole transition also. Not only, I spoke about earlier about the transition from foundation level, grade 1 to 3, to intermediate level, grade 4 to grade 7. The transition from primary school to high school. Are these learners prepared enough to be able to go there? And they get frustrated. The other issue is related to the two streams, and I heard everybody speak to this issue earlier, about ensuring that we allow our children, that's what the ANC manifesto is saying, to have two streams. If you want to go the academic route, you're allowed to go the academic route. If you want to go the vocational route, you're allowed to go the vocational route whilst you're still in high school. We're not saying let's wait up until you finish matric, but you must have an option. I went to a technical high school, for instance, but we're saying we want to have that option in all our schools where students can really choose which options to go to. But we need to deal with the other issues that cause it. It's gangsterism. Our communities are not safe. And the communities around our schools, the environment there, is really, really disappointing, as was put by the gentleman sitting here on my left. I hope he's also left. We need to deal with the whole question of the community as a whole. How does it ensure? In the past, when we did have apartheid, yes, but our people did not sit back and say, children must not go to school because we're fighting this system that was named the crime against humanity. Every parent, whether it's your child or it's not your child, when you see a child who is not at school during school time, you would ensure that you take that child to the nearest school and ensure. So we need to get society to really play a role in this. But the question of dropouts also linked, as you are putting it, to the socio-economic questions in our society. If we don't deal with the socio-economic question, if we don't transform the ownership of the economy, the ownership and control of the economy, if we don't create job opportunities, we are going to have students who are burdened with the fact that at home there's no food to eat. Even though I'm getting food at school, but at home I don't know what's going to happen. And this is reality, for instance, with students who are in universities, who are getting the NSFA scheme, but they're using the money they get from the NSFA scheme to take money back home, to feed their families. And that is the whole underlying issue, which is the socio-economic question, which we really need to deal with in South Africa and transform our economy. This is going to bear some fruits in terms of this issue of dropouts of students and getting more students in class, focusing. A learner must not be concerned about the socio-economic conditions at home. A learner must focus about getting educated and going and making something out of themselves.
There were very, very few good things that were about apartheid, but apparently truant officers, those were those guys who could make sure people were in school, and that was one of them, and maybe we should have them back. And really, what do you want to hear? What is needed in your community to keep children in schools?
As you said, I mean, we asked about incentives. I mean, the government already has a system that says it should feed a child at school. The system is there. The problem, the disconnect is that it doesn't actually happen at schools. That's where the disconnect is. Brilliant ideas from the top, disconnect at the bottom. That is the problem. Otherwise, we wouldn't have these dropouts.
Molly, you were nodding your head. There were obviously some points of agreement. Explain those and where you might disagree.
Well, I think everybody knows that there's a huge socioeconomic factor that comes into somebody being able to continue in school, stay in school. If they don't have the right stability at home in terms of that, then it is going to be far more difficult for them to be able to stay in school. But that shouldn't be the problem of the learner or the students. That should be the problem of our government being able to make sure that we have an economic system that is actually going to allow growth, so that we have people actually getting jobs, their parents being in jobs, so the children don't have to worry about that. So that's very difficult to ask the schooling system to really solve, because it's not really a schooling system problem. That's a problem of the economy and of our government's inability to grow it at a rate that more people can be employed and be able to send their kids to school and not have them drop out. But when it comes to the actual dropouts, I think what we need to do, and what the Democratic Alliance says in terms of incentive, is we need to say to our young people, stay in school, and what we're offering is an opportunity voucher that you can use once you matriculate. So if you can't afford necessarily to be able to get into a tertiary institution, what we'd like to do with this opportunity voucher is use it to help you to either start a small business, to use it to help you to have some form of further education, with an FET or somewhere where you can actually afford to do it, because obviously you can't cover everything, or to use it to be surety for a bank to be able to give you a micro loan to be able to do something in your community, and really start maybe creating entrepreneurs in that sense. Because once you're out of school, you should be able to have some sort of skills. And this goes back to the vocational stream, which is what we as DA would introduce, which would allow people that wanted to within high school, within basic education, to be able to have the skills to do something when they go out of university, out of high school. Because a lot of us are sitting here, and a lot of you guys are sitting here, and you're going to be very good in the academic stream, but if you haven't had the vocational stream, you're not going to be able to do something vocationally unless you go to vocational technical college. We'd like to introduce it at school level, so once you matriculate, you're actually able to start and do something if that's what you want to do. And our opportunity voucher would help young people to be able to do that, and that's what we use to incentivize young kids to stay in school and not drop out, despite whatever socioeconomic background they might be coming from.
Thank you. Our last couple of questions. I will concede a point that's been raised earlier. Schooling is not all about matric, but it is something that a lot of people look at. We do look at matric statistics, so do overseas universities, where some of these gentlemen might want to go. Ryan Fredericks, if you could prepare yourself, please. There are a lot of people who are very suspicious of the statistics that are released about our matric results. One of those particularly, if we compare grade 10 and 11 going through to 12. Ryan, if you would address your question, please, and we'll start with the ANC.
Good evening. Please comment on the alleged practice of culling at schools across the country.
Just to fill in for our audience who don't know what that means, it's a process by which principals in grade 10 or 11 will fail children out of school in that grade, so they don't write matric and therefore don't affect the statistics. Is it fair? Is this happening or not? What's your response?
Well, we won't dispute the fact that these things are happening. It's not only failing students, disencouraging students. We see this mainly in our black schools, from doing maths and science. You find the principal says there's not going to be a maths class. Everybody must just go and do math literacy, because the principals are more concerned, and maybe we need to really look at this. Principals are more concerned about the bonuses that they receive when they have 100% pass rates, the incentive that they get if they've got higher pass rates in their schools. And we really need to relook at this question and say, how do we disincentivize principals from actually doing this? It's really killing our society, it is wrong, and it should be condemned with the contempt that it deserves. No principal should do that. For instance, I went to a public school, but I went to a much better public school, George Kelvin, for instance. I was told that I did all my subjects in high grade. I had to force to do maths in high grade. I was told that I'm not going to be allowed to do technical drawings in high grade, because there was one class of technical drawings in high grade. When I went to the teacher said, well, you can do technical drawings in high grade, but you don't have a teacher. And I had to be forced to actually register technical drawings and stuff like that. I find that to be absolutely wrong. It should not be allowed. Our students must be given enough opportunity to reach their full potential. And if the principals are doing this, we must condemn them. And that is also a consequence of the problems that we do face in our communities. Where are the school governing bodies when these things are happening? Where are student representative councils? There's another issue we've not spoken about. Students must also take responsibility and really look at what is the problems that are facing in the schools. And our communities must be involved. Our parents must be saying, we can't allow this. And principals are accountable to the school governing bodies. But the reality is that most of our school governing bodies are dysfunctional.
Val, is there anything you want to add to that?
It's absolutely happening, Ryan. And in the Northwest and in the Free State, which my colleague earlier cited as great examples, they actually have the most amount of students that have been culled. So in fact, their matric pass rates that were considered the best in the country actually weren't, because so many learners were culled out of the system before they could get there. And it's because of an obsession that we have about we're just getting a matric pass rate, whereas it should be about quality education and making sure that students from grade 10 onwards are continuously monitored to make sure that they actually are the same ones that started that are going to finish. And so in the Western Cape, we've been able to keep the retention of our students by improving the education that we have, the teachers being in the classroom, and making sure that the students that actually start are also students that finish. And sometimes that means in pure numbers, we might not have the most, but at the very least, we aren't cutting students to make sure that we seem to have an inflated sense of matrics being able to pass. Unlike in other provinces where that is exactly what's happening, and unfortunately leaving a lot of young people out of the system, and frankly just dropping out before they're able to actually get into that will help them in the future. And it's sad, and it's something that we need to redirect in terms of how we look at the outcomes of education. It can't just be about you getting up 30%, it needs to be about you being able to do something with that 30%, preferably be able to get into another stream of education afterwards, be it FETs or tertiaries or universities.
Lenny, earlier you showed great disillusionment with a lot of leadership. Do you agree? Are principals the problem here? People being kicked out of school, not allowed to study?
It's not just the principals. I agree with both the guys that it shouldn't be happening. But maybe as a society, we're all too focused on numbers and statistics. And maybe we should be using a different thing. We should be using a different narrative to define what quality education is, rather than just a number. Because once you put a certain number that people have to achieve, people will go to the books to achieve that number. It happens in business, it happens everywhere. Maybe we should adopt a new narrative to define what quality education is, and not necessarily just a number.
Folks, it's getting towards the end of our evening. I'm going to move things along. One question from me, and then I'll ask a couple of questions from our audience about universities. A quick one, please. I'm a first language English speaker, very proud of my mother tongue, and I do speak numerous other African languages. But there's a lot of debate and a lot of people are worried as to what is the future of English in South Africa. It's a complex question, but I'm looking for quite a simple answer. Should English remain as the primary medium of instruction for our schools? And at what grade should it be introduced? Educational specialists are now saying grade 2. So should we keep English as the primary medium of instruction, and at what grade should we start that process? I think I'll start now with the DA. Mbali, what do you think?
As a Democratic Alliance, we take very seriously the constitutional provision for people to be able to use both in their mother tongue. And according to our research, the best way to do this would be to introduce it at a grade R curriculum and have students be able to continue on with 3 languages, of which English should be one of the languages just because of the nature of the law that we live in, as well as 2 other languages, one of course being preferably their mother tongue if they so choose. And then at grade 7 they'd be able to then continue to the stream that we currently have now, where they'd be able to take whatever language their school and where they decided to go to happen. But I think it's very important that we take into consideration that being taught in your mother tongue is likely to guarantee better success in being able to get the very basics of education right, which is why we advocate for it being a grade R level and thereon, rather than what's being tried to be introduced now, which is at the end of some of these schooling, which is very difficult once you've gone through the entire schooling process to now be taught in the mother tongue, and to have it at universities, that are advocating for it to be what's done in terms of the language transition. So, I mean, I think that this is something that we can all agree on, that people should be taught in their mother tongue until such time that they are able to choose that with their mother tongue plus another language that is recognized in the South African Constitution, depending on the medium of instruction at that particular school that they choose to go to, should be what they are educated in.
Lena, I don't know if I could ask you about your students' attitude. Do people want to learn English? Is it something they're scared of? How is it viewed by our communities in South Africa? Is it the language of the oppressor? Is it the language of science? How do people see English?
For me, I mean, I love Zulu. I'm Zulu, so I love it. I'm passionate about it. But then it doesn't mean that you should adopt a delusion in the face of reality. English is a great equalizer in both in the private sector and everywhere else. I once had a debate with an EFF, a member in my local community who's not here. And he said that no, it should all be in Zulu right through in everything, and white people in fact must learn Zulu so I can go to work and speak Zulu. And it's fine. I said, okay, do me a favor. You translate the theory of gravity to Zulu and I'll personally teach it. And if you can't translate those certain concepts, then ask that be only in English. And if you can't teach gravity without using the word gravity, then you shut up.
The children in your communities, or do they want to learn English? That's another part of language. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
But look, we disagree with you right now. I agree with you largely. We disagree because if you look at many other countries in the world who are successful, look at Germany, look at China, they've got very diverse societies. They've got people who are studying their own languages and they're successful. If you look at Afrikaans in South Africa, I always like to make this example, which is an African language. And Afrikaans have been able, and that's what the best thing that apartheid was able to achieve, Afrikaans empowerment, and elevating Afrikaans to be a language of commerce, a language of science. And by the way, many of these concepts we talk about are not even English concepts. They've been taken from different other languages. And we think that we really need to empower our African languages. We need to develop them. But really, the reality right now, how do we deal with the question of English being the medium of instruction today? The issue that we need to do, and we agree that students must be allowed to study their indigenous languages, But we have said, and we've already started, by the way, as the NC government, that students at grade, the problem we said earlier is the transition from vernacular at grade 3 to English. It is really a big problem that we have. So we've already said English must be taught as a subject to students who are going to at grade 4 study in English, learning English as a language of teaching and learning. So we've already started to implement it, where in grade 1, in grade 2, and grade 3, students who are, for example, who are studying in a school in Guamashu, studying in Zulu in grade 1, but is also doing English as a subject to ease that burden on the students. So that's an intervention we've already started to implement, which is quite important. But we need to promote our African languages. Even our universities are starting to realize this, and we need to do that. And we need to look at this model that was used by the apartheid government to promote Afrikaans. And we need to really to invest more in promoting our African languages. Research shows that students who have studied in their language, in their indigenous language, are more likely to succeed in education, both in basic education and universities. And we think that it's going to really, experience an expression of our diversity as a country that is promoted by our constitution. We think it's a very, very important thing. Our students do, by the way, I want to differ. In our communities, we are very good students. We lead students in universities. They do want to study their languages.
Thank you very much. There's a lot more we could say, but I'm very conscious of time, so if you don't mind, I'm going to move on.